Hey everyone, I am Sarah Andreyko, a canine behavior consultant based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And today we are specifically talking about nutrition and microbiology. I've luckily brought along two individuals that are very well informed on the topic. And the question you might be asking is on a behavior channel, why are we talking about nutrition and behavior? Well, those things are very much linked and intertwined. And given that these subjects can be a bit complex and intimidating, I brought along with me today Dr. Honecker and Dr. Jha, who are here to help us understand some of the basics and really take a look at how microbiology, the microbiome of the gastrointestinal system, and nutrition are related to one another, and some of the things that would help for you as a listener to know so that you can look out for the best well-being of your pet in general. So hopefully we can provide some really good, easy to understand information to make nutrition and even microbiology a little less intimidating, a little easier to understand the importance behind it. And without further ado, I would love to introduce to you the two gentlemen here with me. Dr. Honecker, who is the microbiologist on the team with NomNom, fresh dog food company that I will introduce you to soon as well. And then also Dr. Jha here, who is head of bioinformatics at NomNom as well. And to not do any injustice, I'm going to allow these two gentlemen to introduce themselves. So Dr. Jha, let's go ahead and kick it off with you if you don't mind.
Yeah, hi. My name is Ashish Jha, and I'm head of bioinformatics at NomNom now. We collect poop samples from dogs, and we sequence them to identify what sorts of microbes, primarily bacteria, that are present in the dog gut. And we're now trying to integrate samples, the microbiome samples, with the survey data that we collect to identify the tight link between microbes and health.
I'm Ryan Honecker. I'm the director of microbiology at NomNom. I've been a microbiologist since undergrad and for several companies and positions after that. Really interested in it, moved over into the pet health space a couple years ago because it's super interesting. There's a lot of things that we still don't know, which is really an exciting place to be working in. And yeah, I would say microbiology is not that hard to understand if I can understand it. So hopefully we can shed some light on some of the stuff that we're doing. And also, I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned specifically behavior, because behavior is there's a lot of increasing links between actually the microbiome and behavior actually. So it's one of the things we're actually interested in looking at in some of our studies. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I have a huge interest in the behavior side of things. In fact, when I get the first thing I do with some of my fear aggressive dogs, I'm like, probiotics for everybody, calming care here, calming care there, right? It doesn't hurt anything. And we're seeing a lot of research come out to show that quite the opposite. It really helps. And as we have seen some research in humans too, human behavior is directly related to the microbiome as well. So really interesting stuff coming out, and I can't wait to hear more about what you guys are doing on your end in regard to that as well. So I just want to start with a quick definition too. A lot of people might not know essentially what microbiology is in general. We know what nutrition is, it's what we feed our pets, what we put in our body for energy and sustaining life. But microbiology, for anyone that doesn't know, is really the study of, and please feel free to elaborate if I mess this up, but it's the study of microscopic organisms, basically. And those different microorganisms can be bacteria or viruses or protozoans or archaea. And from my understanding as well, those in microbiology also kind of study and understand the host's response to these different living organisms. And in what we're talking about, the host is the dog, the domesticated dog. So would you say that's a pretty accurate representation of kind of what we're looking at and what specific microorganisms that we're looking at when it comes to nutrition?
Sure. Yeah, that was an excellent introduction. Very well done. Very well spoken. Better than I would have said probably. So when we talk about the microbiome and health in general in people and in pets, it's really kind of the way that I think about it is the microbiome is the collection of all these different organisms together. So trillions and trillions of different bacteria, viruses, all these different organisms that you mentioned, but they're all living together. Kind of the way I think about it is kind of like an organ. So the way, like for example, your liver, it consists of a bunch of different types of cells that are doing specific things and all interacting with each other, and then kind of holistically there are some larger things that happen. That's kind of the way the microbiome works as well. There's all sorts of these different organisms, but they're all working together and living in this really complex ecological sort of balance with one another, where they all are doing things that benefit each other, but are also doing a lot of things to benefit us. And then the way that they is meant to kind of interact with the host, with the gut, with our dog's gut. They unsurprisingly have a lot to do with nutrition, the way that we generate energy and harvest energy, the types of vitamins and molecules that they generate, and then how that interacts with us and the molecules that they generate, the positive health impacts they have on us. I mean, it's very complex and rich environment. It's like an ecological environment. I like to use the analogy. It's like, think about like an acre of rainforest. There's all these huge, diverse cross kingdom. I mean, there are bacteria and there are giant trees and there are animals, and all these things kind of interact together in balance to then provide benefit for each other as well as for the environment.
And I like that you point out the benefit there too, because and these are tiny organisms. We can't see these organisms, and as a collective unit in the gut, they are essentially mutually beneficial for the most part, unless you get some sort of overgrowth or disruption there, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's really interesting, the health implications of the microbiome. And so, the largest microbiome, and the one that we talk about the most, because it's the largest and it's also easy to sample, is the gut microbiome. So the bugs that live in kind of in your large intestine, essentially, is kind of the way to think about it. But there's microbiomes on every surface in the body. I mean, your skin, your eye, every single surface of you has kind of an ecological niche where a bunch of microorganisms are living and interacting with us. And so it's as these things can come out of balance, it's called a dysbiosis. So where the balance has been shifted either from an infection or an underlying health condition or nutrition, for example. These imbalances have been tied to a huge amount of different pathologies. So things like we've already mentioned, like behavior, things that you would kind of expect would be involved. So things like nutrition or problems with the gut, things that like pet parents are, things like allergy and diarrhea and vomiting, things that are commonly encountered in pets, but also some things that are maybe a little bit more unexpected. So there's been the role of microbiome in cancer is being very heavily studied right now in a variety of ways. So it's really interesting, and good job security for microbiologists and bioinformatics people, that every time we look at a different disease, we're finding some really interesting links with kind of this additional organ.
So in talking about dysbiosis, this kind of disruption of the GI system, how do you know if a canine has a happy microbiome, so to speak? Can a canine have a disrupted GI system or gastrointestinal system without symptoms, or is it always symptomatic in your experience?
Ashish, you want to talk about that?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, and then you can jump in and correct me. Is that the strategy?
Yeah.
So it's really interesting, because most of the research in the microbiome space is in humans, as you would expect. So there's just not nearly as much known in dogs, and even less that's known in cats. But what we do know is that it's been really hard to kind of define what kind of a baseline sort of reference healthy microbiome looks like in a lot of ways, especially if you look at kind of what organisms comprise that. That being said, there does seem to be what the organism's doing, so kind of the gene content. So the genes make proteins that do things. So there's all these different functions, and very different bacteria can have somewhat similar functions. So what there seems to be emerging is that there's more of a functional sort of basis of what a healthy microbiome looks like, more so than necessarily a compositional basis for it. So this is one of the things that, even in people, we can't, no one's been able to, tens and tens of thousands of samples, no one can figure out what is normal, really, because there's just a lot of inter-individual variability. So this is one of the things that we're really interested in looking for. That being said, we can tell when things are not good. If you have very low diversity, so you have predominantly one type of bacteria, that's not good. That would be kind of akin in our rainforest analogy to, an overgrowth of a particular species, right? So we know things, when we lack diversity, basically we're lacking functions that are normally supposed to be there to have kind of a healthy interaction with the host, with the dog gut, for example. So it's really complicated, but it's something that we're looking at. We also know, if we have the presence of pathogens, something like E. coli or salmonella, some of these things that, that we know are unhealthy, if those are present at higher levels, then we know that is something that's not desirable, because while they don't always cause disease, they're more likely to cause disease if they're there in higher amounts. And so it's a very complicated balance, but it's something that we're definitely really trying to focus a lot of our efforts on, is if we can figure out, which microbiome compositions are risk factors for, development of any number of these pathologies, then what can we do then in kind of a precision nutritional or interventional approach to then rectify that. In addition, probiotics is a great example where if we can prophylactically help maintain through a healthy diet, with fiber and probiotics, we can help maintain a kind of a healthy microbiome, then that helps stop the progression into, it helps maintain the balance, maintain health, protects against infection and other things that can actually then disrupt the microbiome.
So you mentioned probiotics, and we talked about that kind of in the beginning too, with one of the ones that I use for dogs with fear, aggression. But can you explain briefly, what are probiotics and what are prebiotics, and kind of what's the difference with that, and why do we need to be concerned as pet owners about that?
Sure. So prebiotics are I think this is such an interesting part about the microbiome. So prebiotics are fibers from generally plant-based fibers that we don't digest as people. We don't have the enzymes to be able to digest these things, but the bacteria in our guts do. So essentially, we eat these fibers, which are prebiotics, as food for the microbes, and then they do all sorts of beneficial things with these prebiotic fibers. So and they're super interesting, and there's a large body and a growing body of literature about the usage of and the benefit of prebiotic fiber. The other part of that is probiotics, which are live bacteria. So these are things that you commonly associate with fermented foods. So things like yogurts or kimchi, anything that's kind of fermented is predominantly, even things like salami. Basically anything that's fermented bacterially, it has a bunch of these probiotic strains in them. But what we've been able to do is isolate those that are most beneficial from from kind of the environment, from these fermented foods, and then we can deliver those as a supplement. So, and then the additional strength comes when you combine a prebiotic and a probiotic, which is then called a symbiotic. So then you are kind of nourishing the bacteria that are there, but you're also providing these other beneficial bacteria. So the probiotics, they do a whole host of things. Some of the benefits of them come from, molecules that they make when they're in your gut that are beneficial. So there's just a bunch of different things that they do that are beneficial. But then together, in conjunction with good nutrition, that really helps to fortify and maintain a healthy gut.
Excellent. And I'm curious too, I would imagine it's very similar, but in human nutrition, if you talk with a nutritionist or anyone that's kind of in that field, they tell you, they're helping you pick and choose what to actually put in your body, because they don't want to see an overgrowth of the wrong type of bacteria, the quote unquote bad bacteria that kind of takes over and wipes other things out and puts people in dysbiosis as well. One of the things I hear is if you eat too much sugar, that feeds some of the bad bacteria, they say. And then it can even control your cravings, because there's a direct link between what they call the blood-brain barrier, say that 3 times fast, and your gastrointestinal gut lining, to where the microbiome or the microbes can actually start to kind of control what your brain is telling you that it wants to eat more of, so that you feed those things. And it can be quite a vicious cycle. So how similar is that in dogs as well? If you're feeding them, cheeseburgers and white chocolate and all sorts of fun snacks, does it have a similar effect with that body now kind of craving that or wanting that? Obviously we can't ask them what their cravings are, but
yeah. So I think you did a great job summarizing kind of broadly what we know about these types of things in people. And as far as we know, a lot of these things are being reciprocated in dogs. Obviously, they have a different GI system, they have different diets, there are baseline nutritional differences in, what makes a whole diet for a dog versus a human. But a lot of these things seem to be the case, as far as like some of the deeper connections, like, between satiety and particular, the amount of food they're eating, like there's still emerging research coming out on that, but there seem to be a lot of parallels between the way that it works in people and the way that it works in dogs. And so, you think about dogs as, kind of the protein to fat ratio, like, high fat is bad. It causes it causes inflammatory things to happen. It causes decreased, mucosal depth that coat the inside of the intestines and protect them and keep them from leaking. All these things similar things seem to be happening in dogs, but it's definitely an area that is still being explored.
Interesting. Yeah, and just to clarify, satiety meaning being satiated, the feeling of being full. So kind of the same for them too. If they have that feeling of fullness after eating, they're more likely to not want those extra cookies or scrounge for scraps anyway. And it's interesting you mentioned the high fat issue too, because I just recently did a ton of research on raw diets. And one of the issues with the homemade raw diets is it tends to be much higher in fat content, which on the outside looks great. You get this shiny, lovely coat on your dog and it looks like everything's going well. But on the inside, again, with the lining and the cholesterol levels and everything else, it can be kind of wreaking havoc slowly, from my understanding.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to realize when it comes to, diet and nutrition that it's not really a matter of opinion. Nutrition is a science. Food science is science. There are real things that we should be doing, and there are things, like, the AFCO feeding guidelines, which are kind of, bare minimum requirements that commercial food has to meet. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the most balanced or contains the most kind of, other types of phytonutrients and other types of nutritional components that can be ultimately the best for dogs.
Baseline, raw diets, essentially, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And raw diets are also problematic because they, there's two reasons that we cook food. One is because it makes it more digestible, and two is that it makes it safer. And these are both things that are true with pet foods. And there have certainly been documented cases. The CDC recommends not feeding raw because of not only can you get your pet sick, but you can get sick as well from that. You wash everything down when you have raw chicken, but if you're feeding raw chicken to your dog, then you still can get salmonella or campylobacter or food poisoning from it. So they actually, they're I think very smart guidelines against recommending those types of diets.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I always, I hear clients of my own tell me, "Oh, I've been feeding raw for 5 years and I've never had a problem." And I always say, "Yeah, and I worked in the ER at NC State, and let me tell you what it's like to get in a full bunny suit in isolation and have an owner spend $3,000 because their dog has salmonella and has to be quarantined for it." So, yeah, I get to see the other side of that. It's so funny when people are like, "Well, I've never had a problem before." Yes.
Yeah,
you have to take precautions for sure.
Yeah, and there's no, as far as I'm aware, there's no nutritionally sound reason why that is beneficial to, a cooked diet. For sure, processing and food and macronutrient composition and caloric density and all of these kind of nutritional things, there's lots of differences between diets, but raw is a little bit. Also, as a microbiologist, I'm just biased against it because I don't why would you want to bring in these possible
all these bugs?
Yeah, into your house, into your kitchen. You don't have to.
Yeah. No, thank you. Well, it's hard for people because they can't see them, hence the micro part of it. So if you don't see them, sometimes you don't know that they're there, and they're a very real threat as well. I do want to talk a little bit too about what NomNom is doing as far as nutrition goes, because I know that you're doing some very specific diets. It is fresh food, so it is cooked. It is human grade food, from my understanding too, which means that it's not a requirement.
I've eaten all the recipes.
You have?
Yeah.
How do they taste? I thought about it. I did think about it.
They're not salty enough for human taste for sure, but they're good. The turkey is my favorite one.
That's funny. That's my dog's favorite one too. We did a taste test. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, actually, I saw your videos. Yeah.
Yep, they like the turkey for sure. But with putting nutrition into kind of these formulated diets, and of course, every dog is individual and has individual requirements. Tell me how you kind of meet some of those nutritional needs on a mass level with each of these dogs. And I'm really curious to hear too, because I understand that you put a nutrient mix or a nutrient pack into the food as well to make sure that they're getting everything that they need in their diet, not just the bare minimum, but the stuff that's actually really good for them on top of that.
Yeah, and so I kind of we actually just are in the process of publishing a scientific review article about kind of dog nutrition and kind of specifically sort of phytonutrients, so like plant-based nutrients. Because I mean, I mentioned before, and I mean, I'm certainly not, and this is not my area of expertise, but I read the review that our nutritionists wrote. There, there's the AFCO minimum guidelines, but there's all these like a guideline means that it will keep you alive, but it doesn't mean there aren't all sorts of other things that you can that are beneficial and known to be beneficial. They're just not a legal requirement. And so, Justin Smallberg, who is our veterinary nutritionist, board certified veterinary nutritionist, there are very few of them. It's a very kind of weird specialty.
I think there's like 86, I want to say, right?
Yeah, there are fewer than 100 in the country, which is just crazy.
I know it's some small number. Yeah, what a field.
It seems crazy to me too, because it's such an important part. I mean, we have complete control over what we feed our pets.
Yeah.
And so it seemingly is a pretty important thing for me to understand, right? So when I heard that, it was kind of crazy that it's such a rare thing. But so when, formulating these foods, having this like very rare and extremely deep understanding of what's out there, like they're very specifically formulated to meet, of course the minimum guidelines, but also have all these additional things that are known from the literature to be beneficial. I mean, everything across the company is like very science forward. I mean, everything we do is based on the current thinking in the literature, whether it's the diets or our probiotics or whatever, all of our products. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is help take the guesswork, because we've all been in the pet store and looked at what's there, and like, how do you know what's legitimate and what's not, and what's a marketing claim and what's like, and especially once you get into supplements where there's very little regulation, it's really hard to know what products are real. And that's kind of part of the genesis of the entire company, is like, well, let's do this. There's science underneath all of this. Let's build something that's based on the science. And it's like part of what we're doing on the R&D team is, testing our products and regularly and looking them and running studies on, internally. We have a couple studies right now that we're finishing up about looking at changes when you change from a kibble to a fresh diet. We have a study that we're wrapping up about what happens to healthy dogs when they take our probiotic. So we kind of have this cycle where we can develop products and then we can test them and then we can improve upon them. And we can also improve on them as the literature moves forward. Like something new comes out, like, oh, we didn't really understand this about nutrition. Now we do. Cool, great. Let's reformulate our products so that they now have kind of this most up to the date, knowledge that's kind of baked into them.
Yeah, that you hit the nail on the head. That's the exact reason that I was so attracted to NomNom and what NomNom was doing. I mean, you guys have an incredibly impressive team of, again, very well-informed, intelligent people that have all put in efforts from their areas of expertise into this one big project for pet health, and to continuously evolve in your practice with providing what's best, especially through testing, is really what's impressive. I mean, it's very difficult for the average pet owner to be able to weed through all of the marketing fluff that's out there. So choosing a diet in particular, whatever diet it may be, that is science forward, I think is so incredibly important. It just hushes all of the marketing nonsense. I mean, you can still have good marketing, don't get me wrong. I love NomNom's marketing, but I like that it's science forward, right? It's really focused on what's good for the dog. So I do kind of want to, Sheesh, I want to talk to you now too. We're going to involve you. Well, I want to ask about the poop sampling that you mentioned earlier on, because this is really intriguing. I know they're doing this in humans too, taking different samples and looking at them. So I want to see what's going on in the dog world with that, and what this information that you're gathering, how you're doing it, and what this information is telling you specifically about the dietary needs of the dogs that you guys are feeding.
Yeah. So when we talk about the dog microbiome, we are sort of in a very unfortunate position because human microbiome field sort of took off maybe about a decade ago. And, people quickly realized the importance of the microbiome, and people started collecting microbiome from large group of people, from a diverse group of people. And today, we actually know a lot about how a microbiome develops in a baby, when it matures, its effect, like diet, geography, and other sort of environmental factors effect on the gut microbiome in humans. There are a lot of things that we still need to figure out, but it's pretty. There are several papers that have come out addressing these sorts of issues. But when we look at the dog microbiome, it's very, very limited to laboratory dogs. Right? So and then the sample sizes are very, very small. Small meaning a dozen dogs that were, raised in the lab, that were fed a very standard sort of diet, and until I would say early. I don't know when our paper came out, Ryan, but I think it's about about a year ago. It was the data from a general dog population was very, very limited. So one of the first things that we did at NomNom was we started looking at the microbiomes from our customers, and we selected a subset of that data to look at how diverse is the gut microbiome in dogs. And what we found was, just like in humans, when you look at the microbiomes in dogs, we see a lot of variation between dogs. In fact, if we were to use some sort of an agnostic computational approach to say, hey, if you take the dog microbiome, can you tell me how many different groups of dogs are there? So basically, in other words, based on the dog microbiome, can we divide the dogs into different groups? And we actually can. Unfortunately, when we collected these data, we did not have the survey data, which we have learned, and we have started collecting metadata from our customers. So we actually don't know what is the biological basis behind these different clusters in dogs, but we definitely see there is tremendous variation. Interestingly, cats tend to have higher diversity. So there are larger numbers of microbes within cats, but we actually don't see that kind of diversity within cats. So meaning they have a lot of microbes, but they are very similar to one another. But whereas if we look at the dogs, some dogs have a lot of microbes, some dogs have little, some dogs have a particular type of bacteria, others don't. So it's interesting observation, but we don't know the biological basis behind it, and that's something we are actively pursuing.
Ooh, would that have anything to do with, because now as the domesticated dogs' digestive systems have evolved, they're dating dogs back to anywhere from like 35,000 years. Maybe they stemmed from a wolf ancestor, maybe it was another, but I'm curious because now dogs are more generalistic omnivores rather. They can extract nutrients from plant materials, whereas cats can't get some of their stuff. They are obligate carnivores, so they have to have or to extract rather. And obviously you know more about this and can explain it better. They have to extract some of their nutrients from meat products in order to survive well in a healthy way. So I'm really curious if that difference has anything to do with the difference between being more omnivorous or more carnivorous, more meat and plant-based versus completely meat-based.
Yep, maybe. So there is a strong chance that there is a little bit of there's a strong effect of diet in dog microbiome, gut microbiome, but it is also possible that the biology of dogs, right? And this is something that we started to learn about after we saw this observation. So if you think about cats, they are more or less the same size, right? But if you look at dogs, it can go from Chihuahua to Great Dane. So unlike the lab studies where people just take a standard set of dogs, maybe 12 beagles or labs or boxers or something like that, we actually, because we get samples directly from our customers, we have a wide range of dog size, and we actually do see that there is some association between dogs' body size and the gut microbiome, and there is a plausible reason to think that is actually a true association, because if you think about the gastrointestinal volume, right, so the dogs that are very large, they can actually house more bacteria compared to dogs that are like 5 pounds. Like a lot of the Chihuahuas, they are very small. So just like from surface volume, surface area perspective, there is a huge difference. Number one. Number two,
size matters.
size matters, exactly. Number two, there is differences in dogs' behavior, right? So some dogs may spend a lot of time outside, whereas other dogs don't, and that may be contributing. The reason why is the dogs that is spending a lot of time outside, probably sniffing things, eating grass, digging hole, and eating something from the ground, and it probably is exposed to a larger number of microbes compared to a dog that sort of stays inside for a long period of time. So my point is there could be some dietary effect, but there could also be some environmental effect. And there could be some sort of like a dog's like biology, like body size and weight, those sorts of effects as well. But your point of like dog and human evolution is actually really interesting, because dogs, right, dogs and humans are probably so tightly connected with their diet, right? So when we started eating domesticated food, dogs also sort of began to eat domesticated food. So, and we do see signatures of selection in dogs, in their genomes, that in response to eating this high starch food that is prevalent in the domesticated societies. So there's no reason for us to think that there is no adaptation in the gut microbiome of the dogs in response to shared diet with humans. Even that is not very well explored, and that is a fantastic subject, and we're very interested in that as well.
It's interesting because dog food as a separate food from human food is a very recent development, right? So through most of this 35,000 or however many years it is, for most of this coevolution, they ate the exact same food as us, and diet is a huge driver of microbiome composition, and so it makes sense that some of these things have co-evolved. There's actually a study a couple of years ago showing that there is actually a high degree of similarity in some ways between humans and dog microbiomes, which are probably shared environment and shared diet. Those are two big drivers of microbial composition. I also want to comment on, I think it's really interesting that you bring up genetics, because it's something we're really interested in to see, like, are their breed or even kind of broader sort of genomic different drivers of microbial composition. So, we know that there are some between size, but say between similar size but genetically diverse populations of dogs, will there be kind of similarities between or differences between their microbiomes? Like we don't know that yet. We're actually setting up some systems so that we can more carefully look at that. But I think that's super interesting, because the more we understand, the more you can start thinking about more customized approaches to correcting or preventing any sort of pathologies in more and more narrow kind of cohorts of pets.
Yeah, prevention is key. I'm completely fascinated by this topic as well, because it's something that can only progress us further in our knowledge as far as what we should be doing, what we aren't doing, what's natural, what's not, as we continue to try to do what's best for our pets in general. And from a behavior perspective, we are always looking at the difference between genetics and environment and nature versus nurture kind of thing. So it's really cool to think that we're having some of this progress in the field of nutrition based on the same thing. How much of it is nature? How much of it is nurture? Is it the size of the dog? Is it the environment that the dog is in? Is it a combination of factors? Is there, a breed class, or is it specific breed to breed to breed based on how we've bred them in these different directions? Yeah. I mean, I think it's completely fascinating that we're able to start looking into this again with science forward. I mean, that's the fun part of it, is that you can use all of this information to hopefully deduce what is best, because what it ultimately boils down to is people really care about their pets, their family members. We're getting more and more used to having them as part of our family. And so the more we know and the better that we can do for them, I think people feel really good about that, in a sense that they're doing the best that they can and providing the best they can for their pets. So I'm super excited to see what comes out about that, so we can pinpoint more of what is nature, what is nurture, genetics versus environment.
Yeah, and I mean, with behavior, again, it's something that we're definitely interested in looking at. I mean, in humans, there's been all sorts of behavioral links to the microbiome, and some of the biology is super weird and interesting and really cool. But things like, depression, anxiety, all these things that are exact, problematic behaviors, things that you deal with in your training, I'm positive that there will also be analogs in dogs. I think there's only in one study so far. It was a small study on boxers or something, and they showed, like I think it was anxiety and aggression issues versus kind of a healthy baseline, and they saw some kind of interesting differences. So we're interested in looking at that as well, because if we can figure out what some of these bugs are that are associated with, behavior, then we can start thinking about, some specific probiotics that are completely targeted at helping to mitigate, anxiety issues, for example. So it's definitely something that it's a very common complaint of pet parents, of dog parents. And it's something that I think we will certainly kind of play out in some way in the microbiome as well.
It'd be fun to figure out what exactly it is, because we know that nutrition plays a role in behavior. One of the first things that I talk to clients about too is what kind of food is your dog getting? How frequently? What kind of protein is it? And we go through all of those things. And if we need to make adjustments, we do, because oftentimes I feel like there are comorbidities to behavior problems. It's not just one thing. And nutrition is one of those things on that list that we tackle. So we don't exactly know all the specifics and why. We just know that if we do things a certain way, it's beneficial and it helps. So it'll be really cool to actually get those answers to why and how it's very specifically linked, I think.
Yeah, definitely. We should have a chat about having you help us collect some samples of some problematic animals, because we have this giant health assessment and it's self-reported from people who send their samples in, but having someone like having some pets that have some very distinct behavioral issues as kind of a comparison group to a lot of the rest of the dogs we have could help us kind of pinpoint what some of these issues may be.
I would be happy to. And if you're in the greater Charlotte area and you're listening to this, I will collect poop samples from your fear aggressive and offensive aggressive dogs. No problem. I'd love to help out with that for sure. One of the things I do want to talk about too, and we don't have to get super in depth, but one of the reasons that people consider at least trying different diets for their dogs is allergy related. Pinpointing different allergies in canines can be really complicated sometimes. And one of the first things that I see veterinarians at least lean towards is looking at diet trials. So, what are we learning as far as what the microbiome has to tell us about allergies, and how can we use that information to formulate diets for dogs that have either food sensitivities or intolerances and or straight up allergies, and it'd probably be good to touch on what the difference is between those two things.
I was just going to say, I think that's a good place to start, is that because kind of biologically they're very different. I mean a food allergy is immunologically based, and so in the way to kind of think about it is maybe the immune system of the dog is reacting to a component of the food in kind of a similar way that it reacts to an infection. So it's an immune system kind of modulated in sensitivity, which then has all these downstream repercussions because it kind of is treating this like it would an infection in a lot of ways. Food insensitivities and intolerances, there's a bunch of different causes, and it's difficult because if you look at the symptoms, they can be similar, whether it's, like hot spots or diarrhea or some of these things, but the biology underpinning them is very different. Allergy is something that we're super interested in. We actually just recently finished enrolling a study of dogs with diagnosed food allergies, because we want to compare those to dogs without allergies and start to look at what the differences are. So there's certainly a microbiome component of this. There is actually some decent literature about using specific probiotic strains to help ameliorate that, because so much of your body's immune system is actually in the gut, which makes sense if you think about it, because we have this huge amount of bacteria that are living there harmoniously with our bodies. And so this crosstalk between our immune system and all of these bugs is very, very, very evolved and balanced. And most of the time it works fine, right? Like we have all these bugs, we get along, we are mutually beneficial for each other. Things, start looking at autoimmune disease or allergy, that's when these kind of thresholds start to shift and problems can occur. But we know that, with, fiber and probiotics, some of these things, they help generate, sort of the way to think about it is like there's sort of immunological thresholds, right? And they're set at a particular place. And if you're healthy, you're not getting too much inflammation and you're not getting symptoms from inflammation. And having a healthy microbiome keeps those thresholds where they should be. When you start to get dysbiosis and, or allergy or these things, that the thresholds start to change, and then you start to get these inflammatory things, which can oftentimes be cyclical and sort of feed back on themselves, and the symptoms cause more symptoms to develop. But it's certainly something that there's a known role of the microbiome in, and it's something that we're actively looking to help address. There are also some, there are nutritional interventions as well. We're actually working on an allergy product right now, which will be a combination of, some probiotic strains, some prebiotic strains, some nutritional additions to try and address this, because it is a very big problem for pet owners, I know.
So how do you collect data on that as well? So do pet owners, when they're doing their initial consultation with NomNom about what type of food to be on, or they're talking with someone, do they disclose to you that the pet has allergies and that's kind of what they're doing? And if so, do you basically follow up with them kind of survey style to see if there's any effect, or how do you collect the data to see what's really working?
So yeah, there's kind of a small set of questions that we ask when people are signing up for the food, because there are things, we want to know, like, do you have problems with this? You have, there's some specific indications like pancreatitis or things where, our food, like our regular food can't, shouldn't be used. Like those are very, very niche things. So we collect a little bit of data up front. We have 4 different proteins, so you can do rotation, because protein insensitivity seems to be, that's one of the things that drives allergies. We also have pork, which is a fairly novel protein, which people use that have had previous problems. To sensitivities to other more common things like chicken or beef, but then we also have a much and this is more sort of the R&D level, where we have this giant health assessment that we developed. It's about 125 questions, and it covers very medical history, food insensitivity, behavior. It covers kind of everything that we could possibly think about, because then that helps us get kind of a snapshot. We can look at things like we actually published, or we pre-published, where it's under review for publication, a whole study based on just this epidemiological data that we collected. So just based on lots and lots of survey responses, we're able to figure out what some of the risk factors are for obesity, for example. So just using this as a tool in and of itself has been really useful for us. We've done some work on allergies, and we know some of the risk factors there. Like, we're still kind of playing around with those data a little bit. But then that also helps us as we then gather, and Ashish mentioned this earlier, we call it the metadata. So it's these health data that then we link up with the microbiome data, and we can start to say, all right, like these group of dogs we know have diagnosed food allergies. What sort of microbiome do they have compared to similar dogs that don't have food allergies? And we can then start to really distinctly look at what these driving important, and this is what Ashish does, like these super complicated statistical methods and approaches, because the data are really complicated and integrated, but start to then break down like, well, what looks good, what looks bad, like are there and then the next step starts to become, well, can we predict at-risk populations? Like you may not have a food allergy right now, but your microbiome looks a lot like other dogs that do have food allergy. So can we then intervene earlier? And like you mentioned, prevention. I mean, the prevention is so much better than treatment, right? So if we can start to then utilize this data as kind of as, not really a formal diagnostic, but as like an indication of possible risk factors. Like, okay, you need to, go on a protein rotation, and probably take some probiotics, and that should help to shift these populations to, hopefully slow or remove the progression. So these are the things that we're thinking about. We're not quite there yet, but we have some really kind of tantalizing, and this is where the field is in general, right? In human medicine as well, as being able to look predictively at, whether or not you respond to a dietary intervention, or whether or not you respond to chemotherapy, or whatever it is, like using kind of the snapshot of the microbiome. It's called a companion diagnostic, essentially. So you look at what is there, and then you can predict what intervention will work and be the most appropriate for that. So, we're looking at that for allergy, for obesity, for behavior, for a bunch of different things, but that's kind of where what kind of where we're driving towards.
That's incredibly helpful. I mean, you think about it, you really just kind of roll the dice and hope that your dog doesn't have any issues. It'd be great to have, well, they may be predispositioned to an allergy to this because I know just from personal experience, oftentimes if a dog is 3, 4, 5, 6 years old and all of a sudden develops a food allergy, the owners are typically completely blown away by it. Like, they don't understand. Everything's been fine up until now, especially if it's something that's later onset, in regard to food allergy. So to be able to at least predict some of that would be incredibly helpful, I think, for owners in general. So.
Yeah, I mean, allergies are really tricky, and even people we don't, they change over time, right? Because it's this immunologically based thing, your immune system is always kind of changing and evolving because it's kind of designed to be surveilling its surroundings all the time. And so part of the way it does that is it just makes a bunch of these totally random different types of cells and just is kind of and are looking for things that look foreign that it can react to, but it's changing, right? So it's always kind of moving and evolving over time. And then there are things you can do, like your environment, your diet, your lifestyle, actually, like all these sort of things, like where you live, your age has a big impact. Like all of these things kind of change. And yeah, I mean, you can lose allergies and you can gain allergies over time. So it's a complicated. It's super complicated, right? And so anything we can shed, but food allergies are so terrible because, I mean, you obviously can't stop eating. Like if you're allergic, there are things you can do to change your behavior or change other things, but you have to obviously eat. And so food allergies become very, very hard, and then they can be hard to diagnose, hard to disentangle, and it can be hard to treat as well.
Yeah, it's like have you heard the term the genetic red queen? Have you heard of that term before? Where you have to constantly shift because of everything seems like it's okay and you've adapted to one situation, and all of a sudden you have to readapt because the chessboard's always shifting.
Yeah, always shifting. So
yeah.
But yeah, anything we can do to predict and also prevent what moving into any sort of disease state, that's so much better. And that's those are the types of things that we in pets and the field in general are really looking at.
And Ashish, you get to read all of this wonderful data that comes through and be the interpreter for it all, right? You put it into layman's terms for everybody else to understand what all this data means.
Well, I try to, yes.
Being a bioinformaticist means you have to be one of the most patient people because you have to explain things, very complicated things, to people like me who don't understand them very well. So.
Excellent. Well, this has been really, really informative, and I really appreciate you both taking your time this evening to help spread some information about the importance behind nutrition, kind of what you guys are doing in the field to help pet owners feel really good about what they're putting in their dogs' bodies, because ultimately we control what goes in and out of the system, so we control the body. And so I think it's very helpful for people to hear this information, for it not to be nearly as intimidating, of course, that it's we leave the complex stuff to you guys, the experts, but we can break it down into a way that you can understand what you need to do what's best for your family member. I'm definitely going to throw a bunch of resources in the description in the video below. If you guys want to contribute anything to that would be awesome. But there's some articles in particular that are on the NomNom site that you've shared with me that I think would be super helpful. They're very easy to read. And so for anybody's reading pleasure that wants to dive a little bit deeper into these topics, I'll put those in there. And then also, if anybody has any questions in particular, please feel free to pop those in the comments below. If you want to reach out to NomNom directly, you can reach out to the research team. Their email address for that is just research@nomnomnow.com. I will also put that in the link below. Please don't forget, if you like this video, let us all know by hitting the like button. You can hit the subscribe and the bell notification to receive more content just like it. We are definitely going to be doing more based specifically on nutrition and with the NomNom team, because we love this science forward approach to doing what's best for our dogs. So if I forgot anything, now's the time. Anything you want to throw in to let everybody know about that we missed or that's important, any fun projects, anything like that, guys?
Yeah, what are you most excited about right now, Ashish? Besides all the Memorial Day sale stuff you just got.
Yes, I am super excited about my tent. Actually, I bought a dome because now we have I have a humongous dog. She's 70-pound Vizsla mix, and she is claustrophobic. So if every time we try to put her in a car, she just creates a havoc. And putting her in a tent is very challenging. So we bought like a dome so that she can be in there comfortably and not bark or jump in the middle of the night. But other than that, as far as science is concerned, right? So I feel that we are sort of like a pioneer in the dog microbiome space, because we are generating a lot of samples, a lot of data from real world dogs, which is very different from laboratory dogs, because many times what happens when we look at the laboratory research done with laboratory animals is that they are sometimes hard to translate in the general population. So whatever we're doing, because we're working with the general population, we have a different sets of challenges. But if we can overcome those challenges and identify connections between microbiome and specific aspects of dog health, we can then start to think about prevention as well as therapeutics. We have started towards that, and it's an incredible journey ahead of us. And I'm super excited that we are starting to have enough samples now that we can tackle some of these issues, right? So we can tackle effect of diet, we can tackle effect of age, tackle some of the diseases. So we're chipping it away. So one thing at a time. But I'm very excited to be able to be in the forefront in this field. So keep
very exciting.
People who are listening.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, we spent a lot of time developing kind of a library of articles of things that we think are interesting and important, but are kind of portrayed in a way which are, hopefully, fairly digestible to people. So, and if people have other things that we haven't covered, like, we'd love to hear. We wrote a bunch of stuff that we think is cool, but I'm sure that there are things we overlooked, and we'd love to hear from people. If you want to get involved, I mean, we have an R&D blog on the site. We can put the address up. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, where we summarize stuff that we're doing, analyses that we've run. We talk about studies that we're enrolling for. People are interested in those. We talk about other interesting things that are happening in the field in general. So reach out, get in touch, see what we're up to. And we're, doing our best to keep up and letting people know what we're doing and why we're doing it, so that everybody can, stay educated about it.
Yeah, and we can provide Ryan's cell phone numbers for people.
24/7, happy to talk about poop.
Yeah, but there is a 3-hour difference, so let's be courteous of that if you're on the East Coast versus West Coast, right? So don't text him in the middle of the night on accident. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm definitely looking forward to what's coming next over there at NomNom, and especially as research develops. And I'll definitely help with the poop sequencing. I'm all about sampling, and I'll put some information in there too. Just like you said, Ryan, about how people can get involved with helping with the science of things. I think the more people we get involved and excited about this, the better. And the more informed they become at that point too, because they're along for the ride, right? So, but yeah, any questions, feel free to pop them in the comment or reach out to NomNom directly. And I'm very much looking forward to talking with you guys again soon. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. It was great. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.